Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Pat Johnson, Senior Strategic Marketing Initiative Specialist over at Adobe. Pat, how's it going today, man?
Good, Logan. How you doing, my friend?
I am doing wonderful. We're chatting football. It's a long time until the first Broncos game of next season, but you and I are both looking forward to it. More to the point, though, today, you and I were chatting the other day about the unique rotational program you guys have going over within the marketing function at Adobe. We're going to be unpacking that, see what other marketing teams can learn from that, some specific benefits. I think we've got at least 4 that you've experienced and what other marketing teams can learn from that and potentially implement. Before we get into that, man, for folks who don't know you as well as I do, give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and your team over at Adobe are up to these days, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. And thank you for bringing up the Broncos very early on. It's going to be a long off season and probably a long few years, but we'll keep to native Coloradans. I think we'll both keep those hopes alive. But yeah, so I've been with Adobe for about 2 years. I've been in what started at Marketo before Marketo was acquired by Adobe. We had formed a marketing rotational program, and I was kind of the first person to run through it. In short, over a 2-year period, so mine's coming to the end now, I'm given 4 different rotations within different disciplines of marketing. So in my case, it was product marketing and customer demand generation, focused on the install base and cross-sell and all that kind of stuff. And we can dive into all that and kind of go through my tactical experience and just why I'm so passionate about evangelizing this kind of rotational program for people that are really young in their career. How do we take talent that comes in at lower levels just out of college and nurture it in a really holistic and well-rounded way that works for the employee and for the business itself? So
yeah, absolutely, man. I could just tell when we were chatting the other day and you talked about some of your experience in this program, I thought, man, there are going to be some things for other people to learn from that. So in a bit, we're going to get into some of the specific benefits that you as a marketer by going through this sort of program have seen. But let's set the stage a little bit for folks who have never heard of this sort of rotational program. Give us a little sense of the scope, and then we'll dive into, as you pointed out earlier, benefits to an organization for implementing something like this, and then benefits to the marketers who are going through this sort of program. So let's back it up and talk about, just kind of size and scope and implementation of what you guys have today at Adobe.
Yeah, no doubt. So it started at Marketo, as I mentioned. It was definitely a walk, crawl, run type of setup with us. I was the first person to come in, and over about 6 months, we kept bringing in one rotator at a time, which was the perfect way for us to implement it. In short, wherever there was a business need for someone who did not have maybe the technical experience or really the marketing landscape or the landscape of what we were trying to do at Marketo on that team, if there was a place where someone could be plugged in really quickly, knowing that it was going to A, kind of plug that gap, and 2, be a really great way for someone to kind of dive in and get their feet wet really quickly, that's kind of where rotators would come into play. And so I came into product marketing on my first rotation, for example, and there was some turnover that had happened before I got there. It was kind of just a weird time in Marketo's history. And I got my hands on so many projects that I just had no business doing. And I think that's, for the employee, for the rotator, that's a really great side of it. But if you hire right, if you're looking at rotators as really talented, if they have the right experience, I think that there's a lot that they can do to surprise you for, a lower pay band. it's an entry level job. It's someone coming right out of college, but they are given an opportunity and hopefully they prove it right. So that's kind of how we built the program at Marketo. And it was adopted by Adobe very enthusiastically. We now have 5 rotators. I'm going to be the first one to complete the program in its entirety. And we have a placement program after that where I'm still kind of working through that and seeing what the next step is. But it's been the best. It's just, I can't give enough praise to having a program like this in our company. It's up-leveled my career, it's up-leveled, I hope, the business. That sounds a little conceited, but I hope it's up-leveled the business. And I think it's something that everyone should consider.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So with that, I think, my next question was going to be around the benefits to the organization, but I think we circle back to that. I just can't wait to dive into some of the things that you've seen by going through this. You mentioned to me before that building bridges across teams and going into the rest of your marketing career with that sort of mindset has been one of the big things for you, right?
Absolutely. Our manager likes to call us Swiss Army knives. And it's kind of true. We have to pull a lot out that we might not even know we have in our toolkit sometimes. We're put in positions where we need to approach a problem that we may not have experienced in a new rotation, but we sort of have the vantage point of other teams that we've been on. If there's something about a go-to-market strategy and I'm sitting on demand generation, there's kind of a demand generation way to do that, right? There's also a product marketing way where they're looking at things from an entirely different angle and they might have the voice of the customer. They might have the customer's ear a little bit better. How can I help demand gen adopt that? I think is a great place for a rotator, someone who's kind of in this transient role to pick and choose the things that are going to be very cross-functional, that are going to carry across that chasm and really provide a little bit of value and a little bit more perspective around issues that some teams have been doing their own way for so long. I think that's a huge, huge benefit to something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw Dave Gerhardt on Twitter this week talk about one of the worst reasons you could do something in your marketing org, and that is because we've always done it that way, right? The other thing I love there is you talking about, just that fresh perspective that you bring to different teams, Pat. So can you remind me, how long do you typically, in the way that you guys do a rotator program, how long do you spend in each discipline? Do you dedicate, a certain amount of time to each one before you start kind of rotating around and hopping from project to project? Or how should people think about, implementing that maybe in the early days to get some of those benefits?
Definitely. Great question. It's a learning process, I would say. And as I mentioned, I was the first one to go through. So there were some hiccups in terms of transition time and all of that. But in theory, it's 4 rotations, 6 months each. You kind of start mapping out where your next rotation is going to be a month in advance. Obviously not really knowing much about the candidate as you're interviewing them and all of that. There's going to kind of be throwing darts at a wall. It feels like you'll start to very quickly, at least for me and for the experience of the other rotators here, we begin to see what we're good at, what we're interested in, as do our managers. In terms of time splits and timeshares, we dedicate about 25% to the demand operations team, which is where the rotational program sits within our organization. So there's kind of a home-based team where we support a lot of those more tactical operational functions, which in itself is a great place to sit. Everyone on our team gets certified in Marketo. Everyone on our team has a few just core responsibilities that are critical to the business. And we do get to see that kind of 10,000 foot view that specific organization holds. And then the other 75% of our time, we dotted line into whatever team we're rotated onto. So we are mainly focused on what we're doing at that point with a few other kind of fun projects on the side. The transition period is definitely, I would say communication is what will make or break that in terms of transferring into different teams within the rotational program, and then the permanent placement position afterwards, which we're about to go find out for ourselves. If we think about rotations as similar to medical rotations, where you pick one skill up and then you pick another one up, and along the way you're deciding, hey, I'm actually really good at this, or I'm okay at this, but this component of it I'd really like to apply to my next role. If you continue doing that long enough, by the time you get to where I'm at, where I'm a couple months away from actually having that permanent placement, I have a really clear understanding of what direction I want my career to go in. And that's all because of how we split this time. 6 months is a long time for me to kind of understand something about a team. It helps me kind of get through the honeymoon phase of it, helps me get rid of the butterflies, helps me gain confidence in that skill and apply it forward as I choose.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. So some of the advice that I heard, I just want to pull out for listeners a little bit. You mentioned if you're doing this sort of rotational program, giving the rotators, quote unquote, as you call them, some sort of home base for you guys. That's demand ops, which, as you mentioned, has a lot of tactical advantages to it. And then, as they first start to rotate and go out to other departments and work on some of their initial projects, maybe kind of let them test the waters and see where the opportunities are, and don't be afraid of always following the same systematic approach of, they spend 6 months in product marketing next and they have to go here next. There can be some flux there. And I like your correlation to the way that medical programs work with rotational programs there as well. I think that's a good picture for folks to have in their mind. So we talked about one of the benefits you mentioned about bridging the gap between teams and bringing a demand generation perspective to product marketing or vice versa, those sorts of things. One of the other things that you guys have seen that's probably a benefit to you as a marketer as well as to the organization is that cultivation of empathy, not just bringing a mindset of one function to the other, but actually having empathy that can help with cross-functional relationships, right?
Absolutely. And if we start talking about empathy, I do need to give a hat tip to Gurdeep Dillon, and Michael Brenner, to be honest, the two guys leading the charge in terms of empathy in the workplace. I think I'm very lucky to work very closely with Gurdeep in my current rotation, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give him a hat tip for instilling this in me. And that's kind of part of it, right? As a rotator, whether you realize it or not, despite being at the entry level, despite being a specialist, you do create relationships across the organization in a way that other people don't. I think it's something really important to keep in mind. Rotators are culture drivers. They understand the working relationship and the interpersonal relationship of their colleagues in a very different way than someone who has a fixed role. And I think that that's a huge, huge benefit if you have rotators in that can help you cultivate the culture that you want to make. Empathy being something that we really preach here at Adobe and something that we exude and at least try to exude in every single thing that we touch, whether it's empathy or fun or enthusiasm or positivity. Bringing in rotators, having that experience where they get to meet everyone and see everyone work and understand what gets people stressed and what gets certain organizations stressed. What do certain organizations care about? Having that empathy carried across their rotations is wildly helpful, and we have seen the downstream effects of that here. Without question.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think you're speaking to benefits to both the organization and the individual because, I think in sales and marketing today, one of the biggest drivers of your professional success is going to be your cultivation of empathy as a person. As a marketer, it helps us communicate better and write better copy and develop better campaigns with our customer in mind, and not just in mind, not just these buyer personas that we all do, but actually have empathy for other human beings. And then for the organization, developing empathy across functions, as well as you mentioned, kind of being these, silent culture drivers. It sounds almost like, oh, you're on a covert mission to instill integrity across every function, but not so much like that. But because there's that exposure, they have, there's no better word for it, exposure to different teams to see what's going on, where are some of the pitfalls, where are some ways that we can drive the things that we want to in our culture, because the cultures who become toxic and unsuccessful are the ones that aren't intentional. So kind of a side benefit of having this sort of rotational program in your marketing, at least from what I'm hearing, Pat, can be a cultural benefit too.
Oh, absolutely. And not to mention, who's to say that your program just stops at marketing? We have rotators that are in sales enablement. We have rotators that are working on executive experiences and events like that. I sold sponsorships to Adobe Summit last year. It's really what you want to make it. How holistic do you want your young talent to be in terms of business knowledge? So when they do end up plugging into a permanent role, they have so much business acumen about your entire operation. That's been wildly helpful for us. It really is what you want to make it in terms of what makes sense for your organization. Obviously, with smaller organizations, if you're not a Marketo or an Adobe or a Magento or anybody like that, you might want a rotator to bounce between even operations, sales ops, accounting. It's totally up to you. At least in my perspective, and from everyone that's been in the rotation program, there's a lot of fire and hunger for that knowledge as quickly as we can possibly get it. We see this type of program is a huge benefit to us because we get to say, no, I know how this, and probably 17 other things about the business work. It really helps me, just speaking personally, it helps me grow fonder of my company every day. It makes me want to work harder. It makes me want to learn more about it. It really is a two-way street.
Hey everybody, we had to take just a minute today to tell you about our good friend Donald Kelly. If you're not aware, he's the host of the Sales Evangelist podcast. And for over 1,200 episodes, he's been interviewing the world's best sales experts, sellers, sales leaders, and entrepreneurs who share their strategies to succeed in sales. One of my favorite episodes on his podcast is episode 1204. Look for Impossible to Inevitable in the headline. If you're not yet subscribed, just search Sales Evangelist wherever you do your listening. All right, let's get back to the show. So there are two other benefits I wanted to make sure we got time for. One, I think we'll hold to the end, but you mentioned one that really you kind of alluded to right there, and that is as a rotational program member or a rotator, you can kind of have a different perspective, not only on different teams and their different roles and their perspective, but a unique perspective on the bigger picture issues as well as the initiatives. Okay, how are things, you get to see those common threads of, okay, this is the big initiative that our CEO announced, or this is the, our big company-wide OKRs, and I'm seeing how different things are tying to that. And so, as you mentioned, another culture driver is getting people who are more engaged in the mission and vision of the organization, right?
Absolutely. And I think a big piece of making that successful is understanding where you're going to actually house the rotational program within your organization. Since ours is in demand operations, the head of that function is on the marketing leadership team for our actual digital experience marketing team. So she has a very high level view. And because of that, we get to see a lot of that stuff as well. Yeah, I think that that's a huge benefit. And, I keep going back to the benefits for the employee, for the rotator. Understanding what's important to the business at a very early stage in your career could not be more helpful to keeping what we kind of call the general manager mindset. It's been wildly beneficial for all of us going through the program to be able to say, no, these are probably the things that matter because we see how demand operations, in our case, is responding to these things. We understand if we are the employees within that organization and only 25% of our time is going to be devoted to those tasks, they're going to be tasks that need to get done. We get to ask why. We get to kind of see where it fits in, where our piece makes that puzzle a little bit clearer. And again, huge benefit for us, huge benefit for morale for us. And obviously, I keep saying obviously, like we're incredible. Hopefully, we're doing our part for the businesses.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, you can hear in the words that you choose your passion for the way this has worked, which I think, as you mentioned, applies to any sort of organization in some form or fashion that they might choose to roll it out. I mean, I was thinking about, a smaller team like ours here at Sweetfish or a scaling startup that is not the size of an Adobe. And I was thinking exactly what you recommended. You might even go broader because, it's not as far to go over to finance or operations or customer success in a smaller team. And you could kind of do this on a mini scale as well. I don't think you have to be in multiple countries and have thousands of employees in order to make something like this work, just to go back to something that you mentioned earlier. So to round it out today, Pat, so we talked about bridging the gap across teams. We talked about developing empathy and all the sorts of benefits that you can have there, as well as getting people who are bought into the mission and vision because they have a unique perspective on different aspects of carrying out the execution of the overall company initiatives. The fourth thing that I know we wanted to touch on a little bit is what you call Band-Aid fixes for quick asks. If you have these sorts of rotational members of the team that can just drive efficiency in different areas of marketing or whatever functional role they're touching, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And some of that comes from standardizing a few processes for rotators. Like I mentioned earlier, everyone needs to get Marketo certified. That's just something that we need in our back pocket, regardless of what team we're on. I don't sit directly in demand generation right now, but I'm in Marketo at least 3-4 times a week doing something, whether that's for demand operations, whether it's an internal newsletter, anything like that, or whether it's actually driving forward a few things that sit within the commercial demand operations team. That's one example. It's one very tactical example, but it's great having people who have this generalized skill set. And I know we've talked about books in the past. Range by David Epstein, pretty recent book that just came out, but incredible. It praises generalists in a very specialized world. And I think regardless of whether you are one or not, having one around you is really helpful. And rotational programs really help generalists surface, I would say. It doesn't build generalists. It helps generalists surface by giving us the opportunity to say, hey, see if you like this, see if you want to go deep in this. If not, that's great. We have this tool that you can carry, and when you need this later, you'll be glad you did. That's the Band-Aid quick ask part. Does that answer the question? Is that kind of where you were headed?
Yeah, I was picturing that, just being able to, be in a different department and not having to call in demand generation for something because Marketo or something like that. But I love the even bigger point that you made there, Pat, that having this sort of program brings the light to your generalists because they do have a lot of strengths to offer your organization in it. So it can help them rise to the surface. At the same time, you're developing specialists that have at least a working knowledge of different areas. So they've got a generalist base. But like you said, if they go through this rotational program and then you go to, kind of like going back to the medical analogy, okay, now you want to be a brain surgeon or, now you want to be a product marketer. We could get into a whole other episode comparing product marketing to brain surgery, but I won't digress there. But I think it's interesting that this sort of program can help you develop your generalists and also develop your specialists at the same time. So I think that combined with some of the other benefits that we talked about today can be really helpful for folks to think about how they could enact or deploy some sort of program similar to this, whether they're at the size of Adobe or they're a smaller scaling startup. Pat, this has been a fantastic conversation with you, man, as every conversation has been. I'm just glad we got to record this one. If anybody listening to this is like me and has become a fast fan of yours and would like to stay connected or maybe ask some questions of you specific to the rotational program, if they're thinking now about trying to develop something with their own organization, what would be the best way for them to either reach out or stay connected with you, man?
Absolutely. LinkedIn's going to be the best bet. It's just going to be linkedin.com/in/Pat-Johnson-Denver. Please feel free to reach out. I can connect you with the founder of the program if you're interested. I feel like I am just a vigilante for getting more opportunities like this out there for recent college grads. So hit me up with any questions. Logan, I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, Pat. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Hey there, this is James Carberry, founder of Sweetfish Media and one of the co-hosts of this show. For the last year and a half, I've been working on my very first book. In the book, I share the 3-part framework we've used as the foundation for our growth here at Sweetfish. Now, there are lots of companies that have raised a bunch of money and have grown insanely fast, and we featured a lot of them here on the show. We've decided to bootstrap our business, which usually equates to pretty slow growth. But using the strategy outlined in the book, we're on pace to be one of Inc.'s fastest growing companies in 2020. The book is called Content-Based Networking: How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. If you're a fan of audiobooks like me, you can find the book on Audible, or if you like physical books, you can also find it on Amazon. Just search Content-Based Networking or James Carberry, Carbary, in Audible or Amazon, and it should pop right up.